All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for attending. This is our inaugural Cultivating Conversations seminar. My name is Camille Nebaker. I am the director of the UC San Diego Research Ethics Program, and I'm also the director of a research center that focuses on the ethical conduct of digital health research. We call it Recode Health. I've been doing this work for about a decade, and as I've been in this field, I've met a lot of really fascinating researchers from across our UC campus, or UCSD campus, and have really wanted to take some time because of the ethical and legal and social implications and the new challenges that come with the use of digital technologies like wearable sensors, remote sensors, the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. As a person that's been in the field of research ethics for 25 years, the new challenges are really unique. And while they are connected to things that we've had to struggle with before, we're really finding that we as a community, not just as a group that can outsource to an institutional review board, but we as researchers really need to take a lot more ownership in how we think through some of the issues that we're experiencing, whether it be around informed consent or data management, or in many cases where we're collecting data remotely and passively about people who may not be research participants, but bystanders. And so our goal with this seminar series is to promote awareness of the promise of emerging technologies being used in digital health research, but also to create opportunities to identify and discuss related ethical, legal, and social implications. So today it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Raeanne Moore. Dr. Moore is a clinical neuropsychology researcher in the UCSD Department of Psychiatry, where she's utilizing digital health technologies to improve assessment of mental health and cognitive functioning. She has built a program of research around creating and validating new tools for digital phenotyping research. Her research is also focusing on the identification of digital biomarkers and gathering real-world evidence in clinical trials and providing personalized data-driven insights into brain health. As an academic entrepreneur, Dr. Moore is also the co-founder of the digital health startup companies Keywise AI and NeuroUX. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore, who will give a presentation of her research, but also really focusing on the ethical, legal, and social challenges that she's experienced over the course of her work. And we'll have time, hopefully about 20 to 25 minutes, to have a conversation talking about what these challenges are and to have questions and answers from the group here. So I'm going to turn off my mic and leave it to you, Raeanne. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Camille, for that nice introduction. And are you seeing just my full screen, or does it also have the next slides?
We don't see your screen at all.
You had them up and then they went away.
I had them up, I know, and then I couldn't figure out how to unmute with them up. So I was talking about these new, like that we still have these Zoom challenges. Okay, great.
Now I see it. There you go. That's full presentation.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It's nice to see so many familiar and new faces on the call. Camille designed this new series to be very interactive and really to have a conversation. So I promised her I would try to keep my speaking time to about 25 minutes, and I'm going to try to really adhere to that. I will go through a bit my program of research a little bit, as she mentioned, and then pose some new privacy and data sharing questions for us all to kind of think about and discuss. Couple disclosures here. As Camille mentioned, I am the co-founder of Keywise and NeuroUX, and my research is supported by the VA and the NIH. So I'm going to start out by just talking about what is digital phenotyping, and if we can use passive sensing specifically to provide insights into our mental health, and then spend some time diving into an exploration of privacy and data protection factors. So the term digital phenotyping was first introduced in 2015, and at that time it was defined as the moment-by-moment quantification of the individual level human phenotype in situ using data from personal digital devices. In particular, this was referring to smartphones. And at about that same time and a little bit later, Tom Insel, who was a previous director of the National Institute of Mental Health, stepped down as director of the National Institute of Mental Health, got into industry, formed a company, and really got the term digital phenotyping on the map. He called it the technology for a new science of behavior. More recently, others have been describing digital phenotyping as the analytical concept that presumes simply that diseases and illnesses are by and large measurable by digital devices. But really, as a field, we haven't come to a consensus definition yet of what digital phenotyping is, and that's something that we need to still do as a field. But one thing that really gets me excited about using digital phenotyping methods in my research is if we can think about, can mental health problems be diagnosed from the data we collect from smartphones? And can the future onset of mental health problems be predicted from this data? So for example, is someone's lack of social engagement on their phone, lack of phone calls and text messages and social media, is that a sign of depression? And I'm sorry, my daughter's school keeps calling me. Hopefully they'll call my husband. If they call one more time, I might have to stop and answer it though. And when we think about using smartphones to assess mental health behaviors, really the smartphones are the first things that we look at when we wake up in the morning. Oftentimes are the last things we look at when we go to bed at night. We're consistently interacting with them. We take them everywhere with us. And everyone has their own unique digital signature or a digital way that they interact with their phone, which can just be thought of as an overt representation of, our brain health. And we do have great ways to objectively measure physical health, and there's all kinds of wonderful ways to do this remotely at this time. But there still aren't good ways to objectively measure mental health, which is where digital phenotyping can come in. The current approaches to measuring mental health and cognitive health are, in-person or telehealth type sessions. We're relying on self-reported information from people, which can be unreliable. It just gives us a snapshot of their, current mood, for example. There's lots of issues with that, and that it can be biased by retrospective recall impairments. People aren't being truthful. Some things are just really hard to remember as well, and it's just very infrequent. There's also lots of mood tracker apps available, but those require a lot of manually check-in. A lot of those haven't been created through rigorous programs of research. Anyone can build an app, right, and put it on the App Store. And so there's some issues in terms of information that is currently out there on the App Store. And the mood tracker apps also have a less than 10% compliance rate. Letting me go forward here. There we go. So what if smartphones could provide objective measurements to mental health? This was a write-up that you can take a moment to read that was written by a reporter a couple years ago, just kind of envisioning the future of what a doctor's visit may look like, where we really do integrate both objective measurements from that checkup with the physical exam and talking to the doctor, also with syncing up our smartphone and our wearable devices to really help identify what is going on with our brain health. We're not there yet, and we have a ways to go still before we'll actually probably be able to actually really do digital phenotyping in clinical work. But it's a really exciting prospect, and something that, I think that there's excitement that in the field that we can still achieve this goal. Here's some examples of data streams that are currently being used in mental health research. So there's 26 sensors and probably counting that are currently built into the smartphones that we carry with us. In addition to wearables, have numerous sensors and can provide really rich data on a moment by moment level without the user really having to change their behavior in any kind of way. So we can capture things like GPS, physical activity, heart rate data, keystroke data, voice samples, all the way to air quality, weather, background noise, and all of these different indicators are being studied in different ways by different research groups to see if they can identify some type of behavior, distinguish different mental health disorders, be used to predict depression or Alzheimer's disease, or any other kind of diagnostic or symptom tracking progression purposes. So the last few years, we've seen a lot of hype about digital phenotyping in the media, a lot of new papers coming out and new data being presented. This paper was just published like last week, which is why I wanted to include it, using wearables to identify Parkinson's disease years before a clinical diagnosis. This paper had more than 100,000 participants who participated in this study. This was a study that was done by Verily, which is owned by Google, where they had 600 participants initially, asking them to do 12 weeks of data collection. They included 20 sensors plus EMA surveys. They really captured almost every single thing they could with a phone, which, thinking about ethics and what we would want to consent to, I would not be comfortable consenting to pretty much every single thing I do on the phone at the same time for 12 weeks being monitored. That kind of gets to some of the privacy and data security issues that we'll be talking about here in a little bit. Apple and all the big tech companies have, pretty much gone all in on trying to do some digital phenotyping work over the last few years. And, there was Mindstrong, which was Tom Insel's company, which was the first to market. They seemed to scale a bit too quickly. And, it didn't seem like they could really get their tech right. They never published on their data. And they ended up going bankrupt back in February of this year. This is just an example of some of the work that I've been doing with my colleagues, where we study keystroke data to see if it can predict insights into mental health, particularly cognition and mood. Had some highlights from the media here. And, I would be remiss to give a talk without providing just a little bit of data. So I'm just going to provide a couple minutes of data of our technology here. So it really originally started out as the BiAffect project. We've commercialized it, so we now call it KeyWise. And basically, all it is we install a custom keyboard onto participants' smartphones. It replaces the native iOS keyboard. So you just have a new keyboard, which looks and feels essentially the same as the native keyboard. And it's collecting all the keystroke metadata in the background. So what I mean by metadata is the patterns of how people are typing with their smartphone keyboard. So we aren't collecting data of what people type. And this is really important to me, just thinking about things that I'm comfortable collecting from people and I would be comfortable consenting to. So I really wouldn't want to share everything I am typing and all those words. And I'm not comfortable collecting all that data either, but I am comfortable collecting, the typing patterns, how fast someone's typing, how much use autocorrect, how much use backspace. And we have quite a bit of data from a program of research that's been going on since about 2015, showing that just these typing patterns really are assessing cognitive functioning. And really the domains we seem to be hitting with it are processing speed, attention, and executive functioning. And what's been really cool with this data is we've been able to coupling the keystroke data with the built-in accelerometers in the phones, identify the stable and consistent within individual digital phenotype. So thinking about each person having their own digital fingerprint with this keystroke data, this is an example of one user's data over a 7-day week from Monday to Sunday. And you can see each day, their pattern of their keystroke data looks essentially exactly the same. The different colors just represent morning, afternoon, and night. And we're just seeing this really consistent and stable phenotype, essentially. This is an example from another user. So again, they have a very stable and consistent phenotype, but it looks very different. And to just highlight quickly some of the data that we've been able to replicate, which I think replication is also really important, is we're finding that processing speed that we can infer from this keystroke data follows this diurnal pattern throughout the day. So here on the bottom where I'm highlighting, we have on the y-axis the medium inter-key delay, which is basically typing speed. And on the x-axis, we have the course of a day from morning to night. And we consistently see that in the morning, people type a little bit slowly, then they type the most quickly midday. So a lower median inter-key delay is faster typing. And then there's more of a slowing in the evening. People consistently are just typing slower in the evening. Other work has been able to replicate this same diurnal pattern using, this is an example of a symbol search task that people just complete on their smartphone. So an active data collection task over the course of a day. This was research done by one of my mentees and his mentor at University of Southern California. Raymond Hernandez. This is a fantastic paper. If anyone's interested in reading it, it was just published online recently. And they found this exact same pattern with this processing speed task, slower processing speed in the morning, fastest midday, slowest in the evening. They also replicated this pattern when they looked at response times to survey questions on the phone, and particularly survey questions related to negative mood states, in that people responded more slowly to these questions earlier in the day, fastest midday, and slower in the evening. So I think reproducibility of some of these things is crucial in moving the field forward and be able to move digital phenotyping methods out of the lab and into the real world. When we look at the keystroke data by age, this is a paper that we published in 2020, we see that each age group demonstrates this pattern, although people in their 20s type consistently the fastest and have less of a pronounced kind of slowing in the mornings and the evenings. And for older adults, we see that overall they're typing more slowly and we have more variability and they pause longer. We also have this pronounced slowing in the evening for the older users that we don't see for younger people. So thinking about looking at things that could potentially predict neurodegenerative changes such as Alzheimer's disease, perhaps this pronounced slowing in this evening may be a signal of that, something we still need to study. I've also been replicating this pattern in an ongoing RI1 I have. This project is called Sleuth Tech, and there's some members of the team on the call today, where we see, again, with the keystroke data, and this is a group of Hispanics aged 50 to 70 who have risk for Alzheimer's disease and related dementia and who don't have risk. And they do the keystroke data collection for 30 days. We're seeing that in people who don't have cognitive impairment, basically, which is represented by this turquoise line. We don't really actually even see this pattern, but when we look at people who have cognitive impairment, we're seeing this pattern with definitely pronounced slowing in their typing behavior towards the end of the day. So where are we at right now with the state of digital phenotyping? We've really seen this just this year that the industry, all that enthusiasm that I showed you, it's still kind of there, but they seem to be softening on the hype. I think Mindstrong going bankrupt, Pear Therapeutics going bankrupt. There just seems to be now a little bit of softening on that a little bit. However, the NIH really seems to have been doubling down on digital phenotyping research. So just a few months ago, the NIMH put out a call for this grant called Individually Measured Phenotypes, Advanced Computational Translation in Mental Health, which the director of the NIMH thinks is going to be a game changer for precision medicine. And basically the NIMH is committing $30 million in the upcoming fiscal year to this initiative. And why do we think that this information about individual behavior gleaned from smartphone wearables holds so much promise? What do I believe, I guess? And I think because of the scalable nature of it, the ability to collect data from people globally, more people have smartphones than they do running water. It's really the most penetrating technology that there has ever been. We can collect data largely unobtrusively and cost effectively. This really holds so much promise for early identification of at-risk individuals, improving diagnostic accuracy and tracking of symptoms and disease progression over time, better quantification of treatment response, and accelerating clinical trials for drug discovery. But what about privacy? So when we think about the privacy concerns with doing this type of work, there was a 2019 review of mental health apps that came out by Huxville et al. And there was also another interesting follow-up to that by Cosgrove et al., where they found that 81% of mental health apps send data to Facebook or Google for use in data analytics or marketing. 92% of these apps send data to other third parties. People are consenting to use these apps without really understanding what they're consenting to. Camille's done a lot of amazing work in trying to improve this informed consent processing and improve the language around these privacy policies, because they're designed to be specifically difficult to read, and people really don't know what they're consenting to and how their data is going to be used. So users need to provide informed consent. Do they know what they're consenting to? And digital phenotyping relies on the ongoing willingness of our participants to grant us access to various data streams. We're using on-device sensors as well as third-party apps. And as researchers, we need to know that the data that we're collecting really is going to be privacy preserving, and that when we have participants consent to be in our studies and we're telling them we're not selling their data or other people won't have access to their data, that really is indeed the case. In addition to data collection, participants are consenting to the developer's choice of where the data is being processed and stored. So a lot of apps use, say, AWS. Are they HIPAA compliant? Are they not? Right? It's something that people are just trusting us that we're making sure to ensure the privacy of their data. And would companies benefit if their data is sold? Are people being informed of that? And these are some questions that we just need to think about. And we get so much data. So this is just an example. You don't have to be able to read this by any means, but of showing this was just one participant's keystroke data from a 30-day data collection period. This was already post-processed data. So imagine the raw data is going to be that much more, because this has already been processed to get our outcomes of interest. And just from 30 days of data, we have over 46,000 rows of data from this. So it's a lot of data. And establishing trust with our participants is critical. Patients in general are trusting of doctors and researchers. You know, there is certain digital phenotyping data, such as geolocation, you know, uses within, you can think of lots of things that really could be used if someone is savvy enough to identify an individual, especially when I think about combining this data together. So if we're combining their geolocation, you know, with their social media usage and their call log histories and their, you know, wearable activity, if it's in, you know, perhaps, say, I do a lot of work with HIV neurobehavioral research program, you know, there's not that many people living with HIV who would, you know, meet a bunch of different criteria for our study. And a lot of this could be used to re-identify people if we're not careful about encrypting the data and making sure it is anonymized. Participants also really need to trust the accuracy of the data. So this actually came up just last week with one of our research participants who's contributing digital phenotyping for our study of looking at if Hispanics are at risk for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias using this digital phenotyping data. And she told the team that she wasn't comfortable contributing the data currently, like at this time, because all of a sudden she had a super stressful work week. And she's like, well, I just don't think that this data is going to be accurate compared to my normal life. So we need to figure out, are they going to trust the accuracy of the data? And, you know, if they don't, are they going to still want to contribute it? And how do we have those conversations with our participants? Another example, a participant may be motivated to provide voice samples if there is evidence that would reduce a risk of relapse. You know, there could be a person with substance use or serious mental illness, for example. But are they getting anything in return by giving this data to us? And as I've been mentioning, as researchers, we really need to ensure that the data is encrypted and anonymized. There's several factors that seem to influence participants' willingness to share their digital health data. So these factors, most of them I found, and I added some of my own, but this was a great paper on university students' opinions towards mobile sensing data collection that I found online. Here's the PMCID if you want to look it up. But really some of the main factors that have emerged in if people are willing to share their data is the level of comfort in what types of information is being collected. So maybe they're comfortable sharing their accelerometer data, but wouldn't be comfortable selling voice recordings of their phone calls, for example. How is the data being collected? Private data security settings, and inconvenience or intrusiveness of the data collection methods into their daily life. So while we say that a lot of this digital phenotyping data we can collect can be collected passively, meaning participants don't have to do anything different, there is still some intrusiveness to that. So for example, a lot of the GPS data collection apps require that the users, tap and just open the app at least every couple of days to push the data. Or people are seeing their batteries drained because we're installing all these apps and collecting all this data in real time. And so that their phone battery, their phone's having to be charged more frequently. Or for the Fitbit app, for example, you're having to sync it with your watch and then open the Fitbit app regularly to push that data. So there are some things that people have to do. With our keyboard data, for example, people have to get used to working with a new keyboard. And we're all so used to our native keyboards on our phone that there is a bit of a learning curve here. Some people are okay continuing doing that. Some people on day one are like, oh, I don't have time to adapt to this new keyboard. I'm just not going to do it. So here's some nice guidance that I found from this paper by Kilgallen et al. In 2022 on guidance for ethical use of passive data. 1, strengthen and communicate privacy and data security. 2, design apps to be as convenient as possible for users. 3, think cautiously before tracking data perceived as creepy, right? Do we need to track actually messages people are typing? Do we need to track a voice recordings from actual phone calls, or if we get samples of audio data from another way? Same with photos. Do we need to be tracking people's photos that they just take, or are there other ways we can capture visual imagery that's a little less invasive? Offer suitable financial compensation. So we do pay people for participation in all of our studies. We also try to figure out how we can give data back to participants. I've been figuring out what is the best way to return that information and what's going to be most meaningful to return back to our participants in terms of the outputs of what we're finding with our data. We also really need to work on building trust within the communities that we're asking to contribute that data, and be really transparent about the goals and the justification for the data being collected. So I do see some people falling in the trap of wanting to collect every single sensor data just because they can, but is collecting all of that just because we can going to help you achieve, your research objectives, or can you limit it to just a few sensors and still collect what you need to collect without, overly collecting data that is cool, but you have to kind of weigh those risks and benefits there. And then, we've been finding that it is helpful when we're recruiting participants to highlight how an app like this could help them ultimately achieve some of their life goals, whether that's self-monitoring of their behavior, whether it's weight loss, whether it's brain health tracking, whether it's identifying when they're going to have a depressive episode or when they're going to be at risk for suicidal ideation, but really figuring out the best way that we can return back, give back to the community as well as take from the community. So the last thing I wanted to quickly touch base on was the NIMH data archive. So the NIMH has a data sharing policy where all NIMH funded grants are required to upload all of the data from their studies to this national archive, which then can be, the data gets all combined with all the other NIMH data, and it can be used as a tool for people to conduct other studies based on all of this data that's been collected. I'm not personally sure if other institutes yet have adapted this data archive policy. I think they're on their way to doing so. So it won't be just the NIMH. It might not even be right now. I just don't know. I had one of our research project coordinators kind of walk me through the NDA process last week, which was really helpful for me because I actually didn't know a lot of this information about it. But basically, the research team, as well as NIH curators, they get to decide what templates get built and what data gets shared. So it's not necessarily that just you have to upload all your data that's being collected to this data archive, but really we as a research community are help deciding what data ultimately will be shared. And once these templates are built, then others upload their data into the same template. A perfect example would be like the Beck depression inventory, for example. So all the items from the Beck depression inventory would go into a template, and then everyone would just enter the data from that tool. When it comes to the digital phenotyping data, I think it's really important for us as a research community to really help guide what data we are going to be uploading and in what format that data is going to be uploaded. Also, each of these templates has data that is required for everyone to upload. You cannot proceed without entering that data. And then there's recommended information, which you can choose to upload or can choose to not upload. One thing I was really happy to see is that the data gets automatically de-identified through this GUID tool, which is in place to encrypt the data, but it also can help track individuals across multiple studies, data entry fields, et cetera, over time. And so they have put in strong data encryption in place with this. And there isn't really raw data that is being asked at this time to be entered. But again, I think we need to make sure that it continues, that we're making sure the data that's being entered cannot be re-identified as well. So for example, here's an example of the template for GPS data, and this is available on this NDA website, and you can go look at the website without even having to log in, which I thought was really nice too. So if you're interested in checking out some of these templates and some of the data that's being uploaded at this time, you can just go to the NDA website and search for whatever outcome you're interested in. So for GPS data, for example, currently people are uploading process data such as time spent at home, distance traveled, maximum distance from home, et cetera. So none of the raw data is asked to be uploaded this time, and just some of this process data, which can then be used by others to answer specific questions. So that's it. I didn't go too over, I guess, Camille. Like to thank just, so many different people, and I always like to show a little picture of my little love there. And then I just have a couple discussion questions here that I've posted if we want to kick off the discussion, or happy to kind of take this discussion wherever we want it to go. So I'll stop there.
Raeanne, thank you so much. This is really amazing. I think about how much we can know from our digital dust and how much data are out there and how do we manage. And I remember thinking about this, back in 2013 when we were collecting data that weren't covered under HIPAA, and yet were incredibly personal, sensitive health information that we had no idea of how to store it. And I see Kevin Patrick's here, and he was very much involved in those early days of trying to figure out how do we do digital health ethically and responsibly. So I want to, I do have questions. I see we have one question in the Q&A, but I want to just open it up to those who are here. I don't know all of you, so maybe if you have a question, you could introduce yourself and give us some context of where you are as a stakeholder in this field, it would be really helpful.
And I'll stop sharing my screen, but I'm happy to bring it up again if we want.
Anybody want to start with a question for Dr. Moore? Yeah, Eric Mitchell.
Yeah, I'll start off. Obviously, I beat Kevin to the punch. Hey, Kevin, it's good to see Kevin again. Dr. Raeanne, it's really interesting to hear your talk. Thank you. I'm the university librarian here at UC San Diego. So thinking about the flow of data, and you mentioned metadata is really interesting. And kind of thinking about publication and preservation and long-term access is interesting. I guess I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts about how much insight or how much like automated data collection would be useful for researchers. You're talking about this digital dust, right? Things that just get collected automatically that aren't super invasive. And I'm kind of holding that up against what Twitter and Facebook and other social media companies are doing, actually locking away their version of digital dust. They're kind of locking away from researchers. So is there a value in thinking about automated data collection? I don't even know if that's a leading question. It may just be an obvious no, but just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, bringing up the example of what these companies like Twitter and Instagram are, they're using all of our kind of digital dust data for targeted marketing, and they do an excellent job. Oh my goodness, I buy so much crap from Instagram because it like pops in my feed. I'm like, yes, I need that. I want that, right? They do a very good job of that. For our field, I think there is a lot of utility in gathering this data, and we still don't know what data is going to be meaningful based on which research questions always. But I think it's important to go in hypothesis driven sort of and thinking about your outcomes. If you're interested in looking at, can we predict, for example, suicidal ideation? We have a couple studies where we're trying to do that with this digital data. Well, what sensors do we think are going to be most important to collect this data to try to predict that outcome, and then collecting the data that we think is going to be most useful.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the other piece of it, I guess, is also not just digital phenotyping. It's not just the collection of the data, but it's also working with creating the correct algorithms and getting standardization of these algorithms across different research groups that we can have reproducibility as well. So the analytics piece is something I didn't have time to really touch on today, but that's another really crucial piece.
Thanks, Raeanne. You mentioned something and it reminds me of like when we started to do the research back in 2013 using research grade sensors that could track location, activity, what people were seeing, first person point of view with the sense cam. Those were all under the control of the researcher. We could put them in a place. But with the increase in the use of commercial devices in health research that's covered by federal regulations for the protection of human subjects, so we are regulated because we accept federal funds from the public health system, NIH, to do research. So we have standards that we have to adhere to that a company like a Google doesn't have because they don't have the same funding stream. And so when you think about researchers who want to use a commercial product as part of their artillery of research tools, what is our obligation to know what's in those terms of service and to inform people who may want to participate in the study what they might be getting into that otherwise they would never, ever look to know? They may already own a Fitbit or an Apple Watch and they've clicked on I agree, which is what, the standard behavior is. But if we as researchers felt an obligation to let them know what's under that hood, what do you think we should be doing?
So that's a great question, Camille. And I think actually the IRB has done a pretty good job of helping us guide the answer to that question in recent years. So we're now required within our IRB consent documents to include copies of the terms and conditions from some of these companies and to convince the IRB that in layperson terms, that the data is HIPAA compliant, that we're going to own the data, or if we're not, to include in our consent forms in very clear language that, for example, the Fitbit data that we get, Fitbit also is going to own this data. And so to inform people and be as transparent as we can with that. There's a couple apps we were going to use to try to download data recently for social interactions and things like that, that when I had the research team actually contact some of the app developers and ask who owns the data, what are you going to do with the data? Is this going to be secure and confidential? And some of them, if they didn't have a good answer to that, or if they said, well, no, we may go sell this data, this is our data, then we chose not to use that app.
Thank you, Kevin.
So again, appreciate this, Raeanne. And then, some of us have been swimming around in this field for quite some time, as you pointed out. So nice job summarizing. But to me, a big take home for what you're saying is that this is becoming now mainstream. I mean, back 15 years ago when we were capturing these data, it was experimental and research and protocols and this, that, and the other. But increasingly, this is becoming mainstream. And I think also, I imagine you're being approached by pharmaceutical companies, others, factoring these data into other things that might be vectored into clinical care. And I've been very much thinking of clinical care kinds of issues these days with our new Center for Health Innovation, as opposed to more public health approaches. So my question, and I put this in, given increasing value of these data, the comparison to blood and other biomarkers is evident in particular the way we capture, we do these. Mitz Tamita was on this call a little bit, Greg Talavera, a few of us clinicians were on this. So one answer to this is standardizing the quality. Instead of having every individual worry about this, it's why don't we find a way to get the entities that handle this to be certified in one way or another, to do so where when we go to our laboratory and get a blood test, get an x-ray, get a stool sample, whatever, we're trusting them to be managing that in all the appropriate ways, airtight, locked, loaded, everything is done. And so I'm wondering, and I think I'm embarrassed for not knowing, so that's why I just asked Camille, is there some effort like a CLIA certification process for laboratories that could be housing this that's underway at this point? And this could be this NDA, this new initiative in NIH, but NIH's research. I'm interested in mainstreaming these data, finding entities in which they're the proven, trusted bank, where if you're putting your data into this bank, you're saying it is okay to use these data to help improve how you're taking these medications, improve follow-up at home, improving caregiving from loved ones. On and on and on. You know what I'm getting at. And so is there anything like that you folks have heard about, a CLIA type process for entities that become trusted partners?
I haven't heard of any of that. I don't know if you have, Camille.
I haven't.
Yeah, having like
but I
a
was
lab
thinking,
core.
yeah, I was thinking of like my Aura ring, where I get my heart rate variability, my sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, temperature,
That's
resting heart rate.
Yeah.
I get that every single morning. And so after you have that, I mean, that seems like a very standard type of data stream that could be validated to the extent that it could be a CLIA certified.
But Aura still has that. So could there be, and again, don't want to dwell on this a lot, but it's this notion of finding a way to partner with trusted entities that could then be the place that, if as long as my data is going there, no worries, you can capture it. And we all know the importance. Our location measurement project, critically important for exposure biology purposes, to understand where somebody is. You don't understand exposure biology by asking people a question or two about where they spent their time last week. You capture those data on a moment by moment basis if you really want to know what they're exposed to. That's critical to understand, the unknown causes of premature morbidity and mortality, and we still haven't cracked that nut. So at any rate, Camille, this is something that could be thinking about, I think, in there. So
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Ramona, you had a question in the Q&A. Do you want to ask that?
Sure. And I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I was wondering if we know what happens to data a company has once the company goes bankrupt.
I think that's a really important question. I don't know the answer. I know that their patents, like for example, the Mindstrong patents got sold to the highest bidder. Does that purchase come with data, or is it just the patent? I doubt it comes with the data, but I actually don't know if they destroy it or if it's stored somewhere.
Remember the sleep company? We approached them to try and get the big company. What was that company called a decade ago?
What sleep company?
It was a sleep monitoring company, and it was with a wearable. They went kaput, but their data, I think they were trying to sell it to somebody. I mean, it's a really great question, Ramona, because it all depends upon what the terms of use were.
Yeah.
They can sell it to anybody. They can throw it away. We
So
got a
Raeanne,
bunch.
do you have concerns about the way that the NIMH or the NIH in general is asking for data to be stored and uploaded and accessible to others? I know the idea is that the more data, the more that we can learn. But what are your concerns when it comes to data that can be used to infer mental health? Is it something that should be protected more?
I mean, I think that the way that NIMH is currently doing it, I don't have concerns with that, and I'm actually quite comfortable with that. But as I mentioned, we're still in the process as researchers in the community of creating the criteria for what data is going to be uploaded. And I think we all need to be very cognizant of making sure that we aren't inadvertently saying like, okay, well, now the requirements, we have to upload all this like raw GPS data, for example, because that can easily be used to identify an individual. But with all of this data that all these groups are kind of collecting in silos, it does make sense for a collective kind of data sharing entity to really try to, before we can move the field forward, I just think we need more data sharing and more reproducibility of our data.
So when it comes to the NIH, and Barton, thank you for putting that requirement in here, and data sharing. Eric, I'm curious if from the library perspective, do you guys provide guidance to the research community when it comes to data sharing and how to, whether it's compliance or just being mindful of what should or should not be shared? Or I'll stop there and see if how you're involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think data sharing is an interesting space. I mean, particularly this question of like exactly what types of data or what like subset of analyzed data should be uploaded and preserved versus, you know, raw data and what happens with privacy. Libraries are very much in the, we like to curate information that is intended for public use. And so we do have a group that can help guide and support researchers who are trying to figure out their data management plan or who engaged in data publishing. And we even have a couple data publishing services we offer here at the library for faculty who have data sets they want to publish that don't have a natural home in some disciplinary domain like the NIH platforms. But it's such a complex area now, and the NIH requirements, I feel like they took a big step up in terms of complexity and scale. I don't know if Raeanne, you have the same reaction that like the expectations on data publishing have gotten a lot more intense over the last few years. But it almost seems to me like the expectation, I'm trying to think of the right word, but the expectations have grown considerably, right? And it's kind of an unfunded burden for researchers, it seems to me, because the scale is significant. All right, so Dr. Moore is nodding her head. I'm going to pass it back to her.
Oh, no, that's exactly what I was going to say is, I agree. It's great, but the burden it's put on our research teams is immense. And they say we should be budgeting for the personnel for this in our grants. Our grant budgets are already maxed out always. And it's the amount of time that our project coordinators spend on trying to upload this data in the correct format which of course is different than, more often than not, different than how it's being formatted into our labs. It's challenging. It's challenging. It puts a lot of a lot of extra stress on the research teams and takes away from time that we can be actually doing research too. So I don't have a good answer to it. Kevin, you may.
No, it's just more magical thinking on the part of NIH, because and still having a 500K per year cap. Eric, your comment, it's an unfunded mandate. I mean, the concept that this can be done easily. Now, obviously, an institution of the size of ours can have a core resource or whatever and help with groups like, like Camille's and others, or trusted senior researchers who've done this to help with it. But it's crazy. So I wanted to ask another question, because I'm not seeing a lot of others. So I'm asking this on all of these calls these days, because it is on the horizon, and from my perspective, it is only getting bigger and larger. What does AI mean for this, Raeanne? What implications of this? And this can go in a number of different directions. I'm finding the use of AI to help understand certain things, expand my knowledge of what's out there is pretty profound, in particular ChatGPT-4. If anybody hasn't listened to the This American Life episode that Peter Lee from Microsoft, Director of Research at Microsoft and the CEO of Microsoft, I highly recommend that. It was a couple of weeks ago. This is stunning everybody. But how is this going to help, and how might it help people understand these things? Because one thing people are using these AI tools for is to simplify and clarify things for folks, so that they're a co-pilot, if you will. So are you digging into that at all, Raeanne? Thinking about that, your colleagues? You're sort of networked in with some pretty contemporary folks in this. Where's that sit?
Yeah, we've been starting to think about, exactly as you said, using AI as a co-pilot. Even as, kind of a virtual chat body therapist, integrated within some of these data collection tools. Another thing I'm really excited about is, I haven't seen it there yet with ChatGPT, but the ability to do some of our analytics for us, help us with these algorithms, help us really just, with a lot of the day-to-day admin work, maybe with this data, we can eventually get there as well.
That was just released in GPT-4. I highly recommend to this group, if you want to dig into this, is pay the $20 a month for GPT-4, which is the more advanced version, and not just chat. But within the last 2 weeks, they've released a guided code exploration, so you can actually upload data sets, and it will develop a Python code and analyze the data in ways, and it will give you figures, it will give you certain things, and you can ask it, what do these data mean? I haven't had the opportunity to use that, but there have been some interesting reports of the data analytic things, and it's literally creating a subroutine. It is programming, because ChatGPT, these know how to program.
Who owns that data set now, Kevin?
Well, it's not quite clear. It's not like you're giving away. It's like it's like if you have a CSV file or whatever, and you share it with a researcher or whatever, it's there. And so I'm not raising questions about who owns it or who doesn't or whatever. But this is another thing for you to look at, Camille, as far as appropriate use. Nonetheless, the ability to upload data sets and just dig into that a little bit, I think it'll knock your socks off in terms of what this is doing. And this is just the first few months of this. The Peter Lee experience that he was here talking about a couple of weeks ago, that was just about 8 months ago, where they had this, look at they call it sparks of general intelligence. It's just, but
well, no doubt.
It'd be a double-edged sword. And I'm saying it could help us on the co-pilot thing in terms of helping us work with our patients, with our public or whatever, to help guide us to do this or not. I really don't know. I just think it's a very important issue.
Well, it is, and these issues are just going to continue to increase. And I just want to thank Raeanne for being our inaugural speaker for this Cultivating Conversations. Our focus for the next year is going to be on digital health and AI. And thinking about how do we, and I truly mean this by cultivating conversations, we need to be talking about these things and working with each other and troubleshooting and testing ideas that we have. Will this work? And learning from each other. So this is basically the start of a learning community. One of the things that we would like to do, if there's interest, is host a follow-on in-person brown bag that we will have here at Atkinson Hall. This is where our research ethics program is located, and that's where Star Culver and I are physically located today. If there is interest, Star will be following up with an evaluation of our first program here, just to get feedback, but also to invite those of you interested in having an in-person dialogue to join us. And our next speaker, well, we don't have our speaker identified yet for September, but Dr. Zvinka Zlatar is from Psychiatry and will be our speaker for October. And then Edward Wang, who is in engineering in the design lab, will be our speaker for November. And I'm putting their links into the chat right now so that you can look them up. We'll be following up with a flyer with all of the different speakers and their topics in the next coming weeks. But I just want to, again, thank you, Raeanne, for getting us launched, and for those of you attending and talking and thinking about these really tough issues, because again, we can't outsource, and we really do have to have a community of stakeholders that are looking at this from a variety of perspectives. So please spread the word about what we're trying to do here, engage more people in the conversation, and thank you again for being a part of this.